Hello, I'm Stephen McInerney, Academic Director and Deputy CEO at the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilisation. We make out of the quarrel with others rhetoric, but of the quarrel with ourselves poetry, wrote W.B. Yeats. He was right about that. And yet if poetry rehearses an internal argument, where our individual complexities are encountered anew and brought to the surface, this does not preclude the presence of other internal sparring partners. Of these, perhaps none are so present to us and in us as our own parents, whose DNA we carry along with an entire catalogue of their personality traits and quirks, good and bad. There's not much you can do about the odd parents who conceived of you, Derek Mahon ruefully reflects. This is probably why poems about parents so often combine gratitude with regret. In Diptych, the contemporary Australian poet Robert Gray writes movingly of how he came to accept his father, a drunkard who, despite his callousness to my mother, had given or shown me the best advice and had left me alone. James Macaulay, in Because, another beautiful Australian poem about parents, having described an unhappy house in which his father had dammed up his Irish blood and stiffened into stone and creaking wood, asks nonetheless, "How can I judge without ingratitude?" and summarises, "Judgment is simply trying to reject a part of what we are because it hurts." Demonstrating the truth of Macaulay's statement, Sylvia Plath despairingly proclaims, "Daddy, Daddy, you bastard, I'm through," in a poem where she compares her father, who died when she was 8, to a Nazi, and her own suffering to that of the Jews. For another poet who, like Plath, died tragically young, there is a worse fate than losing a parent, and that is knowing they will lose you. In his poem Apologies, Philip Hodgins imagines his parents coming to terms with the news of his terminal illness. Their only child will not bury them. I must tell them how sorry I am. Seamus Heaney's Follower ends on a similarly plangent note. It describes a young boy following his father around the farm as he goes about his daily work, only to find, as he becomes a man himself, that it is his father who now stumbles behind him and will not go away. But poems about fathers are not all sombre. Some are very funny indeed, even when the subject is bleak. They F you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. That's Philip Larkin, whose childhood was no more unpleasant than most other middle-class Englishmen and women who grew up between the wars. It was more pleasant, certainly, than the childhood described by the American Theodore Roethke in My Papa's Waltz. You beat me on my head with a palm caked hard with dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Whatever the bad traits we recognise in our parents, for most of us, as for Roethke, they are held in tension with the admiration and love we naturally have for the people who, in the wonderfully alliterative phrase of Jeff Page, have bred, brought up and boasted us. Geoffrey Lehman captures this beautifully in My Father, where he shows how an otherwise unremarkable man, who often embarrassed him to the point where he wanted to sink down through the footpath, contained hidden depths. His greatest love was porridge, yet in him elemental beauties flash, and taught the future poet to notice the beauty all around him, the cliffs and hollows shaped by wind and waves, and the detail of those treetops. So there is gratitude here too, as well as unease, just as there is in Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays, despite the chronic angers of that house, where we find a father rising early, on his one day off from work in the week, to prepare a fire for his family, waiting for the room to warm before he calls them from their beds. No one ever thanked him, the first stanza concludes, and the poem ends with the poet lamenting his own ingratitude as a boy. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? It's often only as adults, and as parents ourselves, we come to appreciate what our parents have given us. Reading great poems can enhance this appreciation. Having worked many Sundays of my childhood, on one Sunday that he did have off in my 17th year, my father bought me the collected poems of Robert Hayden, which contained those winter Sundays. A father myself, I understand that poem now. So, very belatedly, thank you, Dad, and thank you all dads. Happy Father's Day.